The Chinese Mafia is known for having a global impact on a wide range of criminal operations, from marijuana trafficking to extreme cyber crimes. These gangs have a footprint that expands across the globe, with many gangs dominating areas in the US. The Ping An gang had a strong influence in Boston and ties to the 14K triads in Hong Kong. This crew is very secretive and tight-knit, so membership isn't open to just anyone, especially those on the outside. But one surprising outsider made a huge impact on the group. John White Devil Willis was an American from Dorchester who got inside and climbed the ranks of Ping An. In today's video, we'll delve into this notorious gangster story, from his early life in the gang to running a $4 million Oxycontin ring to his inevitable downfall. All of this and more will be covered as we unveil the hidden truth of this Mafia kingpin. John Willis didn't have an easy childhood. He was born in 1971 and raised in Dorchester, Boston. His father abandoned the family when John was just a toddler. There were rumors that he was involved in an Irish gang. Allegedly, he got into an altercation with a mobster from this gang and broke his jaw. This is what caused him to flee and leave his family behind. Things didn't get any easier for John's family. He had a half-brother who passed away from a drug-induced heart attack. His mother had diabetes, which took her legs. This forced John to become her sole caretaker. But nearly a year after having her legs amputated, the disease progressed and she passed away. The exact age John was when his mother died isn't known, but it's believed that he was only 14 or 15 years old. At this point in his life, John didn't have anyone to help him. He was all alone without any money. Allegedly, he stayed at a dead relative's apartment with no running water, heat, or electricity. But the kid did have an advantage in life. He was very strong. He was known to be athletic and get in a lot of fights, so he turned to weightlifting and allegedly started using steroids. The teen looked older than he really was. When he was 16, he lied on an application claiming to be 18 years old. This white lie was believable, and he scored a job as a bouncer at a bar in Boston. This bar was known to be a local hangout spot for a lot of Asian people. One night, a fight broke out. Things got chaotic really fast, but young John made a bold move and helped an Asian man who was in trouble. This was a situation of helping the right person at the right time, because the man he helped was known as Hooping Joe, a made man in the Ping An gang. Hooping Joe gave the kid a card with his information on it and told him to call if he ever needed help. Now, Joe may have scored the job as a bouncer, but it wasn't enough to help his situation. He was basically homeless and had no idea where his next meal was going to come from. So one night, he decided enough was enough and called the number on the card. A car showed up for him and brought him to a house where members of the gang were. When he first showed up, members of the gang helped him by providing food and clothing, but they didn't cut ties with him after that. He may have been a white kid from Boston, but this kid had something special about him, so they started showing him the ropes of their illegal gambling operations. As they started working with the kid and showing him how business was done, John took everything in and showed the gang a lot of respect. They appreciated his respectful nature and gave it back to him. A mutual trust was built, so John became an asset to Ping An. He traveled to New York and worked for the gang as a bodyguard. He was often sent to collect money from gambling operations as well. John also took in the gang's culture. English wasn't the first language Ping An crew members spoke. For the most part, he didn't understand what the people around him were saying, so he decided to learn the language for himself. He proved to be a very intelligent student, as he was quick to pick up on Cantonese and Vietnamese phrases. Initially, he wanted to learn the languages to impress females, but learning the language also furthered his position with the gang. He also adopted the culture through tattoos. Chinese characters for the word strength and righteousness are tattooed on his left arm. Throughout the 1990s, John spent most of his time working for the gang in New York, but he was brought back to Boston to work as Bai Ming's right-hand man. When John resurfaced in Boston, Bai Ming wasn't at the top of the hierarchy chain, but a turf war had started. Gang members took out other gang members, and many important figures fled to China with no intentions of coming back to claim their spot. By the end of the turf war, Bai Ming was the highest-ranking gang member. As his right-hand man, John acted as a bodyguard for Bai Ming. He escorted him to public places, checked his vehicle for explosives, and most importantly, collected his money for him. John was the ideal right-hand man for this new gang leader. He was incredibly strong, spoke multiple languages, and was willing to do any dirty work that came along with the job. Bai Ming's main operations were illegal gambling dens. He was rumored to be involved in prostitution rings and other crimes. However, one area he wouldn't allow the gang to engage in was the drug trade. But this soon changed. At some point in the 1990s, John did a stint in prison. While he was behind bars, he made some connections that he could do business with on the outside, and that's exactly what happened. Once he got out, he started selling marijuana. Now, this seems small, especially given today's standards, but it didn't stay small for long. Within a short period of time, he progressed to selling larger quantities of marijuana and then cocaine. All of his drug operations were handled outside of the gang. Although John was making a pretty decent profit from the drug trade, Bai Ming didn't want the gang involved. This may have been the right call from his boss, because John found himself back in trouble with the law again and behind bars. But this time around, the connections he made led him to Florida, where he got involved in the Oxycontin trade. From here, he was able to traffic the drug from Florida to Massachusetts. John Willis was brought into Ping An as a bodyguard and enforcer. His strength and daringness were valuable assets to the gang. John's violent tendencies can be linked back to his early days. He had a lot of anger in him as a child from his father's abandonment. Like most kids, he would have good days and bad days. On his good days, he could channel his emotions into sports like hockey. On his bad days, he was known to pick fights with other kids. He was never one to back down from a fight, which is exactly how he gained the Ping An's attention. Allegedly, the night that he helped Hu Ping John, he didn't know who the man was. It never occurred to him that the man he was helping was part of a powerful group of people. He just saw him getting attacked, so he stepped in to help out by punching the attacker in the face and dragging him to the bathroom. Once John was brought into Ping An, he made a name for himself as an enforcer. He used his fists to seek justice on behalf of the gang. But here's the thing. Ping An was a Chinatown gang. Like most Chinese gangs, they're clouded by secrecy. Everything the gangs do is undercover, ensuring people on the outside don't know about what happens on the inside. Yes, there are a lot of stories floating around about John Willis as a violent drug dealer, but the violence part can't be proven in a court of law. Chinese gangs are known to keep their crimes out of the public eye. Although this gangster has been in and out of jail numerous times, none of his stints were for acts of violence. All of the alleged feuds and violent crimes he may or may not have been a part of are Mafia lore. But when it comes to any violent crimes he may have committed, John Willis did tell author Bob Halloran that gangsters kill gangsters, criminals kill criminals, and idiots kill civilians. Basically, what this means is that any violent crimes he might have committed were between gangs. Innocent people on the outside never met John Willis's violent wrath. Like many fallen gang members, John Willis's rise in the criminal underworld is ultimately what led to his downfall. Even the best criminals can't evade the law forever. As John's Oxycontin ring was growing, it got to the point where it was worth $4 million. Now, when it comes to his bust, he wasn't the initial suspect for the investigation. At the time, there was an investigation centered around a few other Chinatown targets. However, John was involved with these targets, which eventually brought the heat over to him. There were a few stories floating around on how exactly John got busted. Both point to the brothel that was being investigated at the time. One story claims that he was speaking to the initial targets at the brothel about finding and beating up some men to avenge an employee they injured. Allegedly, this conversation was wiretapped and authorities had information on him. The other story going around claims that he entered this brothel and left with a large bag of marijuana. What we do know is that he did something to shift focus on his operation. The police did find evidence of his Oxycontin trafficking from Florida all the way up through Cape Cod and Boston. After a year-long investigation, he was sent to trial and sentenced to 20 years in prison. However, John Willis maintains that he was sentenced unfairly. This is because during the investigation, authorities didn't find any pills on him. They seized $80,000 from him and discovered he had 5 burner phones. During the investigation, he was not able to account where the $80,000 came from. While this is pretty damning evidence, he claims it doesn't make him a drug dealer. He tried to spin it as though that could have been money he was saving from a young age and just didn't believe in banks, but authorities weren't buying that story. What added to his downfall is that authorities got his girlfriend involved. Yes, John White Devil Willis may be a violent drug dealer with no remorse for his victims, but he has a soft spot when it comes to his girlfriend and her daughter. Once he caught wind that she could be in trouble, he was willing to do whatever it took to keep her safe. The police were going to bring his girlfriend in on charges of witness tampering, but they were willing to make a bargain. If John accepted the plea deal, they would leave her alone. And that's what happened. John pled guilty and accepted the 20 years. Ping An may no longer be around, but the legacy of the White Devil lives on. John Willis was the only white man to climb up the ranks in a Chinese gang. As we spoke about at the beginning of this video, the respect he paid is what helped him seal his entry into the gang. He was very respectful of the gang members, their families, and their culture. Since he was only a teenager when he joined, he was willing to learn. He appreciated the help they gave him at a time of need and would take on any job for the gang to show his gratitude. Another thing that made him unique is that he came all alone. He didn't use his gang status as a way to show off to other kids or bring friends into the gang. What's really interesting about John's legacy is that he didn't just adapt, he thrived. He learned the language and spoke it fluently with proper grammar. This made him a key player when it came to networking and expanding the gang. It also helped him with his side operations. Now, Chinatown gangs do operate slightly differently than Italian mafias. In the Mafia, if a made man disobeys his boss, there are serious repercussions. Basically, if a crime family's boss doesn't want to be involved in dealing drugs, anyone who wants to stay in the family must follow suit. This makes John's story even more interesting. He was able to continue being Bai Ming's right-hand man without causing any rifts. His drug dealing operations didn't bring any extra attention to the gang's activities. John White Devil Willis may not be one of the most well-known Boston-based gangsters, but his story captivates true crime buffs. He started off as a boy who had nothing and went on to lead a $1 million drug operation. He also left a legacy as the only white man to climb the ranks of a Chinese gang to get to the top. It's rare for outsiders to make it into the world of organized crime, especially when they are from an entirely different culture. But John's strength and bravery got put to the test at the right time when he helped a gang member in need. When he needed help, the gang was there for him. John climbed through the ranks as an enforcer. He was the man Ping An higher-ups could count on to collect money from the gambling dens. If somebody didn't want to pay, John could beat it out of them. Of course, John's rise in the criminal world is what brought the cops' attention to him. Although his Ping An leader didn't want to participate in drug deals, John went on to make a profit from this trade anyways. In the height of his $1 million Oxycontin operation, the police had enough evidence to put him behind bars. Since John has been in prison, the Ping An gang no longer operates in Boston. This wraps up our story on John Willis, aka White Devil. Make sure you hit like, share, and subscribe if you want to see more Mafia Mystique content.